All right, Ken. So that takes us into another possibility of why remote work is being mandated against. And this one has to do with underutilized office space.
Pretty obvious companies have spent a lot of money on some of these buildings and office spaces. And if they're walking in and seeing a lot of empty areas, it's probably not making them feel too good about that.
And that makes some interesting alignments. So you could have a situation where a politician is like, yes, we need to have remote work, return to the office because of, some of the other things that we've said, perceptions of like people actually not doing their work, not collaborating. And then I've read stories of that could be one political party. And then let's say there's a mayor of a large urban city and they see the economics of it, not just from within the organization, but the impact on the downtown areas where a lot of these large buildings are. And so there's underutilized office space. You think of just in the building that in connection with the business, but also all of the additional businesses, small businesses, the coffee shops, the lunch places, all of those additional businesses and the revenue that can be generated there. So you've seen some interesting cross political parties pushes to get people back into some of our downtown areas, back into the offices. And
Yeah, and again, I think this is something that's valid. It's a valid concern because there's been a lot of infrastructure that's been put in place to make these businesses successful where they're at. And so if all of a sudden people aren't coming into the office and utilizing all these things that have been built up around it, that causes a different set of problems for a different set of people.
And what do you think about just the idea that some of the people that are in leadership positions that are making these decisions that, when they came up in business, however you want to frame that, they were all in person. Because you think about if they're a certain age, like the technologies didn't exist for, or possibilities did not exist for remote work, maybe they're just preferences or they're like, oh, this is a way for us to level the playing field. We need everybody in. It's because otherwise it could benefit either the people that are in person or benefit the people who are remote. What do you think about that? That it's just like we did it this way when I was young, and so everybody needs to do it this way, or do you have a different interpretation of that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that was one of the interesting things I found when we were doing the research that I hadn't thought about before was this idea that the people in these executive positions and these leadership positions, they come from a world where everybody came into the office all the time, right? And so that's how they've risen up through the ranks. That's how they prefer to monitor what's going on. That's how they prefer to stay in touch with what's happening in the company. And so when people are remote and they have to go more into using different types of technologies, different look at different dashboards or things. I'm generalizing here because this wouldn't be everybody, but a lot of those people, they're not comfortable doing all that, right? They need somebody else to do it for them. We've worked with some different companies where they get real nervous when the leadership's involved in some of like the audiovisual rooms we designed and everything. And even when we're like, look, you walk in, you could go boop, boop, you're in the meeting. They're like, okay, our guy wants to walk in and it just happened. Okay, so he just needs to like think it or say, yeah, he just wants to walk in and like it's just happening. Well, what if he wants to share some content? Yeah, he just wants that to happen. Somebody needs to hit the button or send the information or pull it up. It's like I think some of these people they're not used to, they're used to just coming in, calling the shots, looking at something. Hey, you go do this, and when they have to do it using technology, it makes them uncomfortable. And we've even seen some situations too where some people have been very successful at that, and then like the software updates, right? So now like the button they used to hit that was always up in the left corner. For some reason, they've done the software did some research and said people like to look in the middle of the screen for that. Well, they've kind of just memorized the steps of how to do things. And so when one little piece of cheese gets moved, it's like the end of the world, right? Like they have no idea. They don't have that intuitive like, oh, look, here it is right here. Now it's red instead of blue. And so I think that could be some of the pushback as well.
I must say, I was very fascinated with the sound effects that come with our AV solutions. So, is that with all of them, or is it just certain ones that go boop, boop, like that? That was nice. I noticed it was not on the content sharing button, but it was on some others. Yeah, definitely. I can see like a comfortability with it, but basically of like the underutilized office space. Another thing is definitely been in the news because as we have some of the larger groups that are having them return to office, they think the office was really greatly underutilized, but I don't know if you've seen some of those stories where it actually there are more employees coming back than they have space for. And then they have problems in the parking lot or, with transport, getting people, like the logistics of just getting everyone in. So maybe that ties back to one of the other ones are like, we got to figure out a way to make it less attractive to actually come back into the office. Yeah, I've seen some of the articles we read of the using the peer pressure or even implied punishment to encourage more office time.
Yeah, and I think when there's not a real reason behind it, like it's kind of like when they make fun of a parent, if child's like, why do I need to do this? Because I said so, and you're just like, "Hey, I'm not into doing this. You have to be like, okay, here's why you want to do this. Because, if you put all of your things in your backpack before we go to school in the morning, it's going to be easier for us to get out the door. Okay, kid might do that, kid still might do that. But just to be like, because I said so, you just want to be like, I want to defy that. Because you said so, I want to do the opposite of what you said. We'll actually get into that argument a little bit more later too, but I think it just encourages people to be deceitful too. I love the term the productivity theater, which you've referenced before about the person that would just walk through the office with a piece of paper like they're on a critical mission.
Yes.
You know, or you get people that are pretending, they're having their buddies swipe their badge. You do it for me on Tuesday, I'll do it for you on Thursday when I go in.
What's the response to something like that? If they catch, then they're like, oh, we need the technology to be better to catch this. We need more cameras in. We need more surveillance in. Instead of what do we talk about? Some of the best practices of what is the task? Where is the best place that could be done? Some of the other things that we noted, having the office attendants tied to your performance reviews, or some of them were paying remote workers less than in office workers to where they were adding differences in compensation to where you were located.
Yeah, you threw me off with the payment because when you said the payment, I was actually going to say, I mean, maybe if you do have to come into the office, you should get paid more than somebody that's remotely. Maybe that's a trade-off. Like if I have to come into the office, maybe I should get paid more for having to come into the office versus somebody that's working remotely. I think there could be a strong argument for that because there's some intangible things that I think are benefits that we'll get into in future conversations. And we've probably mentioned them before in some of the intro stuff about some of the intangibles that, for me personally, it's like it would take a lot for me to go back to a job where I had to go into the office, even just periodically. That was what I was going to say earlier, too, was I think the other thing about the return to office is they're saying you need to have your butt back to the office, right? But then they're in Zoom and Teams meetings all day. So I had to drive into the office to remote into meetings with clients and other team members that aren't in this office. That makes zero sense.
Yeah, I think that if you can have your intention match your policies, have alignment all the way down because that's the thing that starts to degrade morale and employee satisfaction. Ultimately, I mean, employee retention can impact your bottom line. So, in our next segment, we're going to be talking specifically about one company's return to office